go.
Welcome to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill on 710 WOR.
Welcome to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. I am your host right here on 710 WOR Radio in New York City. On the other side of the non-glass is my producer, Anthony Filippio.
That's me.
Also known as the Flipsonator, Flipsenberg, or, of course, it's now the Jewish holiday, so I think Flipsenberg makes sense. What do you think?
I guess
Flips?
that works. For this week. For this week, it works.
All right, so he's wearing his Yankee hat, everyone. Make sure you get a picture of this, because do some gloating. Come on, gloat it up. Give me some gloating.
It was a good season.
Yeah, good season.
I'm gonna say it was a good
they
season.
swept the Twins, and
Yeah, we'll see what happens this weekend.
On you go. On you go. On you go. All right. So for those of us who grew up in Boston, in fact, my entire family, they're a little bit unhappy with me right now because I'm helping you celebrate the Yankee win. So well done, well done, well done. All right. Let's tell the folks how they can find us, shall we?
Yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
let's do it. We're available right here every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. on 710 WR Radio in New York City. Then the show becomes available on a podcast on the iHeartRadio app and iTunes. Just search NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. The show is also on Instagram at NYCBD Official and on Twitter and Facebook. We're also shooting the show live, as you all know, and now have a YouTube channel. Jimmy Cozier, who I've mentioned countless times, writer of hits like She's All I Got. All right, we should probably sing a few bars, but I can't sing, so I'll just keep moving. And his video team are here shooting the show. The team is led by Devon. Devon, say hello to the group. Hello. So good to see you. Does an amazing job. They post a YouTube video.
Is that his accent?
I think it might have been. We gave him an Australian sound, didn't we? Hello. So good to see you. Maybe that's British. I'm not sure. I just rolled right into that. I'm not even sure what I was doing there. All right. We post it on YouTube at 10 a.m. every Sunday morning. So if you want to watch the show, you can do it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on. The character of our show, as I've said so many times, is what? It's infotainment, right? Flips, is that our word for the day?
I feel like you said that a lot, actually.
I have been saying that lately, so I have to talk a little bit about where the info comes from, right? So sometimes we need to give all the credit to where the info comes from. So we want to reference specifically Marijuana Moment, a wire service assembled by a guy named Tom Angel. He's a legalization activist and journalist covering marijuana reform nationwide. There's also another piece of press online, I might add, called Ganjapreneur. There's one for you. A resource that provides essential daily news and insights to cannabis entrepreneurs, investors, and industry participants since 2014. So when we talk about this sort of thing, specifically infotainment, that's where a lot of it is coming from. All right, let's discuss the 4 segments of the show. The first segment is called Cannabis in the Tri-State +1, Massachusetts, where, as you know, I update you on key cannabis issues in these 4 states. The second segment is called Stunning and Amazing Facts, what I consider to be the most relevant issues and opportunities in the space since last week. Having said that, each fact is called this is where, go ahead, Flipsy baby, give it to me.
Stunner.
The Stunner. There
We need
you
to make
go.
some T-shirts.
I will attempt to educate and perhaps stun you just a bit. Our third segment is called Today's Guest. It will be my honor to introduce today A.J. Vaynerchuk, who, along with his brother Gary, built one of the most powerful social media agencies in the U.S. A.J. now represents literally 25 NFL ball players, so he's moved on with his career in a new company called Vayner Sports, many of whom have extensive experience with CBD, so I think the audience might want to stay around for that.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, he sure is. We will end with our 4th segment called Your Messages, providing answers to the most interesting direct messages we received following last week's show. Now, you may remember, everyone, if you listened to last week, we had Roy Bingham on our air. Roy, who's the CEO of BDS Analytics, one of the preeminent data businesses in the space, was such an interesting interview that we didn't want to interrupt him. So we're going to go back to some of the messages that we received last week. All right, we will be back with our first segment, Cannabis in the Tri-State +1, right after this.
It's one of the hottest healthcare issues in our country today. Cannabis and CBD. What is it? What are the medicinal facts? Where does the U.S. stand versus our allies and competitors around the world? Tune in to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill this Sunday at 8 a.m. on WOR and find out.
So people get confused sometimes about cannabis versus CBD, right? CBD is made from hemp, can be made from the marijuana plant as well, but the majority of it is made from hemp. It's the CBD component that has everybody very excited about the health implication, and that in concert with combinations of THC is really where the real solutions are.
Jeffrey Hill will explore the issue of cannabis and CBD as it has never been explored before. NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. Tune in and find out this Sunday at 8 a.m. on 710 WOR or download the podcast and listen anytime at iHeartRadio.com.
Welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill right here on 710 WOR Radio. And as you all should know by now, after the show airs at 8 a.m., it goes in as a podcast to iTunes and iHeartRadio. Now, Flips has promised you 3 consecutive weeks. It's going to be on Spotify. How we doing there, Flipsy? Oh, I'm seeing a sad face.
This one's, it's not me. So
all right,
eventually it'll get up there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, don't look at Spotify except for music, but not for the show. All right, well, one thing I left out before the break, and that is
I think Jimmy's song is up there, actually.
Okay, that's very exciting. We should start playing a little bit of Jimmy. Beyond the data points that I mentioned, BDS, Ganjapreneur, and Marijuana Moment, I also want to thank many of my listening audience. You are sending me data, analytics from all over the world. I believe I've gotten information from literally 11 countries now. That's quite remarkable to me, certainly. So I want to thank you all for that. All right, let's move on with the first segment of our show, Cannabis in the Tri-State +1, which is Massachusetts. And you all know that's a nod to my dad, who lives in Massachusetts. And 65% of our listenership comes from the Tri-State, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, so we focus there. All right, let's begin again this week with New York and Connecticut. They kind of go as a tandem these days. And why is that? Well, last week we talked about New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who revealed that he will be meeting with governors from throughout the region to coordinate marijuana legalization plans as a joint effort. Fascinating. Cuomo and Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont made an announcement following a meeting in which they discussed how to ensure there's consistency among cannabis programs that various neighboring states are working to enact. The pair said federal inaction on the issue has forced their hand and forced the states to take the lead in this area. It's also important to avoid a patchwork approach among states in the same region. Imagine if you had a better deal in one state versus another state, you'd have citizens of each state running across the border to take advantage of the other state's offering. We can do more together than we can working alone, Cuomo said. We don't have a federal government, in my opinion, that is providing leadership on these issues. Others might argue on other issues as well. Cuomo said that they're going to gather regional partners for a meeting on October 17th to talk it all through. He said the goal is to have a proposal ready by January of 2020 so he can include it in his State of the State address to propose a new approach to New York lawmakers. NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill will track this closely and report it right here on our air. All right, let's move on. New York officials say a 17-year-old has died from vaping illness, which is the first one in the state. This vaping thing doesn't seem to want to go away, ladies and gentlemen. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, yet again, same governor, hasn't changed his name, I would suggest, said Tuesday that a 17-year-old in the Bronx had died from a vaping-related illness. The first vaping death reported in the Empire State. Cuomo did not otherwise identify the person, but called vaping a public health crisis. Quote, parents have to know, young people have to know, you are playing with your life when you play with this stuff, he said Tuesday. The death in New York is the 23rd vaping-related death reported nationwide. 18 were confirmed by the U.S. Centers of Disease Control and Prevention last week, and several others have been reported since the agency's most recent public update. Okay. Before we move on to New Jersey always gives us time flips because there's never any new news in New Jersey, so we thank New Jersey for giving us some extra time, don't we?
Yeah.
All right, so I completely agree, and this show agrees, and our air agrees, that this is a critical issue, right? People that are getting sick, and obviously even worse, from vaping is a massive problem. But when you get underneath it, there's probably about 15,000 companies in the vaping business. There's 35 to 50,000 companies in cannabis. There's 3 companies that have been identified creating this problem, and all of them come from outside the country. So a lot of being able to order product online is part of the problem. So if you've got a company doing business internationally with an online buying location here in America because they simply put it up on any browser they choose to, and then a consumer goes online and buys something for 20% of what it's being sold by any reputable brand, I don't suggest that it's caveat emptor, which means the buyer beware entirely, because we need and the government needs to look out for the health of its citizens. But goodness me, ladies and gentlemen, we also have to pay attention ourselves to what we're putting inside our bodies. Flips, thoughts on that?
Wasn't it supposed to like wean people off cigarettes too in the beginning?
In the very beginning, yes, that's true. In fact, I was in the electronic cigarette business, and my selling line, it was Spire Electronic Cigarettes, was we aspire to inspire the smoker. I had 8 oncologists saying basically that everybody that had died of cancer in the last 10 years in their practice might still be alive if electronic cigarettes were being used earlier in their career, when instead they were using Marlboros, Marlboro Lights, Cools,
Wow.
Newports, and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
That's how it began, but that's not how it ended up,
Yeah.
right? Now the category is kind of sold in convenience stores, and some of it has strawberry, vanilla, and raspberry flavors,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of been dumbed down, to use a phrase, and unfortunately is creating some problems. But I want to come back not to electronic cigarettes or vaping, but rather this notion of the consumer in healthcare must look out for themselves. They have doctors, certainly, right? And doctors provide great value. And obviously, you should go to your doctor on all issues. But having said that, the power of plants, herbs, wellness looking beyond just conventional medicine is where a lot of people are realizing some true benefits. And that's really driven by the individual, isn't it? The doctor's not going to recommend it. The doctor hasn't studied it, and the doctor's worried about malpractice, right? So people need to look out for their own health care. And goodness me, if you see something that looks completely unrealistic, an item for $5 that normally sells for $70, perhaps there's a problem there. That's all I'll say. All right, let's move on to Massachusetts. The 2017 law in the Commonwealth that legalized recreational marijuana tried to make room for the little guy by limiting the number of dispensaries a company could own or control. The new law also directly encourages dispensary proposals from black and brown entrepreneurs whose community members were often unfairly targeted for arrest when pot was illegal. All right, we all know that. We've talked about that countless times. But so far, winning a license to sell pot in Massachusetts often seems to be determined by whom you know. What a surprise. Or if you could afford to pay a lobbyist or consultant who knows people. All right, now let's look at that. At least 12 of the 17 recreational dispensaries open as of May 1st of this year hired lobbyists or former politicians. The Boston Globe Spotlight team obtained thousands of emails relating to dispensary proposals in a host of communities. The fingerprints of influence peddlers, consultants, lawyers, and lobbyists were all over them, right? Scores of former government officials have flocked to the marijuana industry, including former state senator Andrea Nuciforo, I'm sure I'm blowing that one, Junior, by the way, former Boston police superintendent Chief Daniel Alinsky, and former Boston City Councilor Michael P. Ross, right? All stated by the Globe. This should be no surprise. It would be a surprise, in fact, if the influence business had taken a pass on a lucrative potential business like cannabis. How about this? The flood of former government officials coming into the category is striking. They include former governor and current presidential candidate William F. Weld. He won't be current for long, I don't think. Former state House Speaker Thomas Finneran, former state senator and former Boston City Councilor Michael Ross, and even former Boston Police Superintendent-in-Chief Daniel Alinsky. All those together are striking. I know some of those I repeated, but I wanted to make my point. And the lobbying payments can be eye-popping. Listen to this. For example, New England Treatment Access, which has opened dispensaries in Brookline and Northampton, I went to school near there in Amherst, has paid $530,000 since 2014 for a lobbying effort that included work by former state senator Robert Bernstein and former representative James Valley. Cannabis companies have paid Perullo and the Novus Group at least, ready for this one, Flips? $760,500. Okay, I think influence peddling is a good business. Let's move on. Governor Baker's ban on vaping sales is expected to survive the first legal challenge in U.S. District Court in Boston. And Governor Baker's 4-month ban on all vaping products, as you may know, was expected to survive that challenge after a federal judge in Boston seemed cool to arguments seeking a temporary halt or restraining order. In seeking the order, attorneys for several local vape companies and a national vaping trade association said businesses are facing irreparable damage. The ban has forced them to stop selling the majority of their inventory, or in-state customers, they said it made it nearly impossible to stay afloat. What does that mean? That means customers can't find what they want, stores can't keep paying payroll, there's going to be people going out of business left and right. Now, I believe, as I said earlier, that we need to wrestle with the issue of vaping, right? And try our best to put a big wall up around good versus bad. And the government should pay attention to that, right? Without any question. However, there's a number of people that are using vaping to ingest medicinal product, right? What do I mean by that? The number one way of getting an item into the bloodstream, right, which makes it what's called bioavailable, is an IV. All right. What's the second one? Not smoking it, if you can believe that. What's the third one? It's vaping. All right. And then after that, it's eating a soft gel or a gummy. And then after that, it's transdermal cream. All right. So when you take a vape off the marketplace entirely, that's a delivery system for a lot of medicine that you're also eliminating, which I don't think people are really understanding. All right. Okay. Let's move on from there. All right. This has very real consequences because most people in this business live week to week. And it's not just this business, it's almost all businesses, right? There are hundreds of employees in Massachusetts that have been laid off already, said the attorney for the group, Craig Rourke, who represents many companies, and he said that in the U.S. District Court most recently. That's why the temporary restraining order would give them a little bit of relief, and so we can have the time to have a full evidentiary hearing, which is obviously what all the companies in the space would like to do, while the political figures are immediately saying, hey, just make it illegal and let's be done with it, right? I think there's a gray area there that ought to be explored. All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Breaking cannabis news in the Tri-State Plus One. We'll be back for our second segment, Stunning and Amazing Facts, right after this.
It's one of the hottest healthcare issues in our country today. Cannabis and CBD. What is it? What are the medicinal facts? Where does the U.S. stand versus our allies and competitors around the world? Tune in to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill this Sunday at 8 a.m. on WOR and find out.
So people get confused sometimes about cannabis versus CBD, right? CBD is made from hemp, can be made from the marijuana plant as well, but the majority of it is made from hemp. It's the CBD component that has everybody very excited about the health implication, and that in concert with combinations of THC is really where the real solutions are.
Jeffrey Hill will explore the issue of cannabis and CBD as it has never been explored before. NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. Tune in and find out this Sunday at 8 a.m. on 710 WOR or download the podcast and listen anytime at iHeartRadio.com.
Welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill right here on 710 WOR Radio at 8 a.m. every Sunday morning. After the show airs, it becomes a podcast on iHeartRadio and iTunes. We're also available on virtually all forms of social media at NYCBD Official. So if you're a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or now YouTube user, just enter NYCBD Official and enjoy the show. All right, let's move on to our second segment, Stunning and Amazing Facts, with our first stunner. And what is that?
We got to get some T-shirts.
You want to get a T-shirt?
Stunning and Amazing Facts.
Stunning and Amazing Facts.
Yeah.
Should we include like a picture of one of the stunners? Or
No, just the words.
how about
with the logo and everything?
Should it be your picture, perhaps?
Absolutely not.
I think, okay.
Maybe just a photo of a vest.
Photo of a vest. All right, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who don't know me that well, I wear a vest every single day, so that's where that joke comes from. Not very funny from the secondary guy on the show. All right, so stunner number one. Actor Seth Rogen is helping to spread the word about how to get criminal records cleared as part of the second annual National Expungement Week. In a PSA released last week, the noted marijuana enthusiast and co-owner of the cannabis company called houseplant talks about how 77 million Americans have criminal records, adding that a large amount of these records are for minor offenses and seriously impede millions of people's ability to live. So true. Having a record can impact what? Access to jobs, housing, education, and the right to vote, Rogan said. It doesn't help them, and it doesn't help this country, he also said. Now, I kind of buy that, ladies and gentlemen. I particularly buy it when cannabis-only offenses result in 7 to 10-year prison sentences, and these people are in jail, right? It's now legal in the same state that they were sent to jail in many cases, so perhaps that's where expungement ought to begin. All right, so to facilitate expungements and help those with prior convictions, advocacy groups across the country are holding events that will provide services like legal aid, voter registration, health screenings, employment workshops, and a host of other things.
How is this not an automatic? Like, shouldn't this just happen?
Dude, nothing in America happens automatically. If it
crazy.
has to do with the assembly, the state house, the governor.
I think it's like common sense.
It's politics. When I was younger, things happened a little bit cleaner. Everybody still yelled at each other, but they ended up making a decision. Nowadays, they yell at each other, and they go back to their respective corners, and they come out for another round, and it never seems. There's no handshake at the end, it seems like. All right, Cook County, Illinois, State's Attorney Kim Foxx, who advocated for a marijuana legalization bill that her state's governor signed in June, also called attention to the events in a series of Twitter posts. There's just millions and millions of people in America who can't vote, who can't get a job, and can't do things that many, many people take for granted because they have an arrest record for something that isn't illegal anymore, Rogan told Vice in an interview about his advocacy efforts. All right. Let's move on, ladies and gentlemen, to stunner number 2. It wouldn't be a day without Beto O'Rourke saying something famous. He proposes drug war reparation funded by marijuana taxes. Now, this is a guy who's, I think, gone way overboard, right? So what did he say? He said marijuana would not only be legalized under a plan proposed last Thursday by Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, but cannabis tax revenue, are you ready for this, would be used to directly repay formerly incarcerated people through a new, quote, drug war justice grant program. Unlike other contenders who have come around to supporting marijuana legalization in just the past few years, the former Texas congressman has long called for ending marijuana prohibition, and his new plan goes further than those rolled out by other campaigns. I guess it does, ladies and gentlemen. Nobody else is suggesting that you take tax money and basically give it to people that were in jail for an illegal activity. It was indeed illegal. My encouragement is let's expunge their records. Okay, I'm good with that because it's now legal in that state, but I don't think we need to pay people for doing something that at the time they did it was illegal.
Yeah, definitely not.
All right, so I don't buy that. All right. With rival candidates have proposed funding programs to begin repairing the harms of the war on drugs through job training, legal aid, expungement efforts, loans for small businesses, etc. I can get a lot closer to that personally, right? Like virtually every other Democratic presidential candidate, with the notable exception of former Vice President Joe Biden, O'Rourke is calling for federally legalizing marijuana by removing the drug from the Controlled Substance Act. All right? He would also push to remove marijuana as a deportable offense for immigrants, mirroring legislation filed in the House this week. U.S. Senator Cory Booker, another 2020 contender, introduced a bill to do so earlier this year. O'Rourke wants to let marijuana businesses use banks and to increase access to medical cannabis, including a provision to let doctors at the Department of Veterans Affairs recommend it, which would help address our PTSD-challenged military, a discussion we've had on this show countless times. All right. That's a mouthful, isn't it? All right. So what did he do? Effectively, Beto O'Rourke stood up in front of the universe and said, every bill that is in front of Congress right now, the States' Rights Act, which gives the states independence over the federal government to make their own decisions, he wants that passed. Right? He wants to pass the banking bill. Right? The banking bill says that the federal government should put less pressure on banks for doing business in a space. He wants that passed. Right? And there's countless other bills he wants passed. I don't disagree that those bills are important, especially allowing the Veterans Affairs to work on PTSD patients, since every doctor that works for the Veterans Affairs Association knows it would help, and they can't do it because it's still Schedule 1, and the Veterans Administration is run and owned by the federal government. Not owned, but run, certainly. All right, let's move on to stunner number 3. Australian capital legalizes recreational marijuana. All right, interesting. Michael Pedersen, the Labour politician who proposed the legislation of marijuana for personal use, sits in the Parliament chamber in Canberra, Australia. It's its capital, of course, and it's become the first city of the country to legalize recreational marijuana for personal use. The Australian Capital Territory Legislative Assembly voted to legalize possession by adults of up to 1.8 ounces of what's called flower or dried marijuana and cultivation of 2 marijuana plants for every individual. All right,
when are we
fascinating. Well, I've always wanted to dive there at the Great Barrier Reef. Now I have another reason.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, at least you have the reason. I would not do it if I'm going diving. I promise you that right now. Okay, there you go. The most important, stunning, and amazing facts affecting this category as defined by the famous Flips and myself. When we come back, we will move on to the third segment of our show. Today's guest will be my pleasure to welcome AJ Vaynerchuk, who currently runs a company called Vayner Sports and represents 25 professional NFL players. You won't want to miss that.
It's one of the hottest healthcare issues in our country today. Cannabis and CBD. What is it? What are the medicinal facts? Where does the U.S. stand versus our allies and competitors around the world? Tune in to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill this Sunday at 8 a.m. on WOR and find out.
So people get confused sometimes about cannabis versus CBD, right? CBD is made from hemp, can be made from the marijuana plant as well, but the majority of it is made from hemp. It's the CBD component that has everybody very excited about the health implication, and that in concert with combinations of THC is really where the real solutions are.
Jeffrey Hill will explore the issue of cannabis and CBD as it has never been explored before. NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. Tune in and find out this Sunday at 8 a.m. on 710 WOR or download the podcast and listen anytime at iHeartRadio.com.
Welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill right here on 710 WOR Radio. After airing every Sunday at 8 a.m., the show moves as a podcast to iHeartRadio and iTunes. We're also on all social sites, including YouTube at NYCBD Official. Let's move on to the third segment of our show, today's guest. And today's guest is AJ Vaynerchuk. AJ and his brother Gary started Vayner Media, reputed by many to be the firm that showed the world how to leverage social media. After building the firm for 7 years, AJ left his operating role to spend some time addressing some very challenging health issues in his life. Today, AJ has started Vayner Sports and represents over 25 NFL athletes, many of whom are experiencing some very positive results with CBD. Welcome to the show, AJ. Good to have you with us.
Great to be here, Jeffrey. Thank you.
All right, we're really excited. So you and your brother obviously built something very exciting, right? Many of us in the marketing space are very familiar with it. In fact, if you think about marketing, it's quite remarkable, ladies and gentlemen, because with all the agencies going global and pretty much 4 or 5 major holding companies owning the communications world, AJ and his brother kind of made a mark, built a firm from 200 to 850 people in an environment where that's almost never done. So tell us a little bit, tell the audience, if you could, a little bit about that experience, what you guys built together so they know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it was the best way I can describe it as a roller coaster in the sense that, we started just the two of us, picked up a few of my friends from high school and college from the very beginning back in 2009, about 10 years ago. And in a period of 7 years, took it from 2 to 650 people. And what made it so interesting, it was also the Wild Wild West in a bit of a way in terms of social media. We started and focused on social media first in 2009, where the agencies that you mentioned saw it as an afterthought. They either thought it was a fad, and even if they believed in it, the budgets were too small for it to really matter to them. And so we made a conviction. We had conviction that that was the future, that maybe money would move away from newspaper and other forms of advertising and shift to things like Twitter and Facebook and what became Instagram. And by the time I think the rest of the industry agreed with us, we had a big head start. And so it was just a wild, wild ride. And just really fun along the way.
Well, it's quite exciting. And I know my audience knows that I've had many clients in the consumer packaged goods space like Unilever and Nabisco and on the healthcare side, Schering, Plow, and Pfizer, OTC. And And all these guys went through that evolution, if you will.
Absolutely.
The most junior people in the building were given the social media responsibility. Usually, the guys that came right out of school.
Yeah.
And today, those people are some of the most important people in the entire enterprise.
Absolutely. I think what was so interesting was that social media had a stigma as platforms that their kids used. I would walk into a C-suite meeting in 2010, and when we brought up Facebook and Twitter and talked about how important it would be for business, the main decision makers scoffed at it. And not everybody, and I give major credit to some of our early clients like General Electric and Pepsi and other brands that made that bet. But there was a lot of skepticism met with, can Facebook actually be something that's more than a fad and actually drive consumer purchase?
Well, let me remind everybody that Kodak scoffed at the film business,
That's
never
exactly right.
ending, right? And they didn't believe the phone business would ever take over them. The Yellow Cab scoffed at Uber.
That's right.
And we could go on and on about companies that have disrupted businesses, and you guys have certainly disrupted the space. So that's well done, well done.
Appreciate it.
So then you had a little bit of some challenging personal issues you were kind enough to share with me. That took you to another place. Why don't you share that with us if you don't mind?
So I was diagnosed with something called Crohn's disease when I was 19, so 13 years ago. And I definitely suffered from Crohn's even a few years prior to being diagnosed. And so when it came to taking a business and being the chief operating officer and taking it from 2 to 650 people in such a short period of time, stress was a constant aspect of my life. And when it comes to Crohn's, stress is the number one way to have you go into a flare-up and have more issues than you typically would have. And my last year of operating Vayner Media, I went to the ER 5 separate times from my Crohn's, and actually eventually elected to have intestinal surgery where I had parts of my large and small intestine removed. And I attribute the vast majority of those issues from, one, not managing my diet well before I was diagnosed and even shortly after I was diagnosed, and 2, really stress. And so CBD is something that I found to be a great alleviator of the symptoms. And I've had a lot of different trial periods with other forms of medication that I, of course, listened to my doctor and had my doctor prescribe, but I never really found something that worked for me. But CBD has definitely been the best of the bunch.
Which is fascinating. So let's go back to the Crohn's dynamic. And I did a lot of homework in anticipation of today. So I did a little bit of analytic on what Crohn's was. And they talked a lot about inflammation as a fundamental part of the Crohn's problem.
That's right.
And so talk a little bit more about that.
No, absolutely. So the reason why I ended up having intestinal surgery was due to a scar tissue buildup. And when I had the surgery, we removed the part of my intestines that had the most severe damage from scar tissue. But to your point, when it comes to the symptoms of Crohn's, inflammation is what causes the pain and the cramps and things of that nature. And, stress creates inflammation. Eating the wrong types of foods creates inflammation. For example, I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink caffeine or partake in any caffeine. No dairy. I have to limit red meat and raw vegetable and raw fruit. So there's a lot of dietary restrictions. But what I've found is that the CBD has been helping me the most cope with my symptoms from the inflammation and dealing with that inflammation.
Absolutely. So, we've talked about managing inflammation and recovery as something that's fundamental. The clinical data clearly supports that inflammation management and therefore faster recovery is a fundamental of what CBD does. In fact, everybody's been talking about Gronkowski's now in the CBD business, Tiki Barber, ex-Giant in the CBD business, Ray Lewis in the CBD business, and a host of others. So many of these guys are realizing this, and of course there's an ongoing conversation in the NFL about CBD being a subset of cannabis, and some of the owners are still a little nervous because, of course, cannabis at a federal level is Class 1. But you then moved your career on, and I wanted to kind of set that up because you kind of backdoored your way or front-doored your way, either one.
Yeah, depending on how you look at it.
Exactly right, into the NFL.
Yes.
And let me just say this. For those of us who are watching you on YouTube right now, everybody can see that he's done a damn good job of recovering because you look great.
Thank you.
Really
That's super nice you say. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'm feeling really well. The
your stress lines are virtually gone, right?
Yeah, I still have stress.
Now.
I still have stress, but it's good stress.
Yeah.
I was able to diagnose which parts of my previous career was the most stressful and the most damaging and eliminate those. I've been great with my diet. I've been great with exercise. CBD's been very helpful. The surgery I had 6 years ago was very helpful. So I appreciate it. I'm feeling great.
Yeah, and I guess that's something I want the audience to take away, which is, it's no one thing, right? No one
Correct.
thing is going to change your life. Nutrition is fundamental. working out, kind of getting yourself aerobically sound again.
Yes.
And, obviously things like plant-based science like CBD can add value, and that value can be, really important as a foundation for diseases like yours, as long as the other component parts are kind of
absolutely. And, one other thing that's unique about Crohn's disease is there is no cure, at least not yet. And so to the point that you just made, I'm in a constant battle of trying to optimize my life and my health. So like you said, CBD has been a major benefit and aspect, but there's a million ways to look at it. And like you said, exercise and diet and stress management. It's a puzzle, and it's one I'm constantly trying to figure out and solve.
Sure. Well, you seem to be doing a good job. So let's talk a little bit about Vayner Sports. So after you kind of made your move into kind of a different lifestyle, now you're back. So tell us what that's all about.
So to that point, my original plan was to take a year off as a sabbatical. But just the way I'm wired, it didn't last a year.
That whole year off thing never really works.
No, but I took 4 months off, and it may have been the best 4 months of my entire life, which was fantastic. But I was ready to jump back in the saddle.
I bet your wife was too. Maybe the kids. I don't know.
Yeah, kids weren't there yet.
Okay,
I have 2 small kids. Right. They were both more recent. My wife probably wanted me.
I won't connect one to the other.
Yeah, exactly. And so, after taking that time off, I really wanted to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. And sports is a big passion for me. Business is a big passion. So combining the two made perfect sense for me. So I'm now the CEO of something called Vayner Sports. We represent professional football players, NFL, American football. And to your point, CBD is also an interesting aspect because, one of my clients recently retired, Derek Morgan, was one of the only active NFL players that was highlighting his beliefs in terms of the benefits of CBD. The point you mentioned before, there are tons of players utilizing it for their benefit in terms of recovery and pain management, but nobody was really willing to go on the record as an active player. It's been more of the former players, like you mentioned. But my client Derek was active, showed up on the Today Show and said he believes CBD could be a huge aspect of the fight against CTE, which is unfortunately a big, news story of the health issues that football players suffer while playing from the helmet damage.
Right. So, the analysis that I've done clearly defines inflammation management and recovery, which every athlete needs, and certainly an NFL athlete who takes 4 or 5 days to recover, only to kind of get their body completely destroyed again in the next game, right?
That's right.
Okay, so but the longer term dynamics, which we'll let the audience kind of come to their own points of view. There's obviously a lot of discussion around any number of things, and CTE, which does ultimately have an inflammation challenge, right?
Yes.
CTE and there was a movie about it, and of course the NFL has settled a large suit on this topic. I find that fascinating that some of the players are preemptively using it in anticipation of trying to avoid some longer-term problems. Now, I've made the point also on this show that if you read Tom Brady's new book called TB12, what you get is plyometrics or what does he call them? Plyometrics. I can't remember exactly.
I'm not a Tom Brady guy. So.
Okay, well, I am. I grew up. My dad. This is an homage to my dad. Dad, you listening? All right. So anyway, he came out with TB12 and pliability. That's his deal. And power of plants. His whole book is about the power of plants. And so I made a projection that the day Tom retires is the day he announces the TB12 CBD brand.
I'm with you. That seems right on track.
I'm putting a significant bet on that one.
You should.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your athletes. How many athletes are you representing now?
27.
Which is quite remarkable. Now, who would you say from an awareness standpoint would be your, kind of most visible athletes?
Yeah, our most mainstream guys that most, if you're a real football fan, will have a good understanding of. Allen Robinson, #1 wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. And then probably the next guy, at that same level is Leonard Williams, former top 10 pick, New York Jet.
Yeah, amazing. Of course, the Jets are having a great year for those of us who are following. So
I grew up a Jet fan, so that comment hurt twice.
Yeah, of course it is. Jet fan, Met fan. There you go. If it rhymes, both painful. All right. So tell us for 2 minutes here. So you come back off a very serious kind of personal issue. You work your way through it. Brilliantly done.
Yeah.
You say, okay, I've been off a year. I need to reengage. You engage. Here you are. 2 years later with 27 NFL athletes. How do you do that? How do you get 27 guys who are making a small fortune to get on your payroll, and you've never been an agent before in your life?
That's first and foremost a great question. I've had a lot of people ask me that, especially the competition. So a few things. One, an interesting narrative of my career and my brother's career as well is that we've always been outsiders coming in with a fresh perspective, right? So let's go back to the first business we talked about. Gary and I started an advertising agency with a combined 0 days of advertising agency experience, and I think that's both a blessing and a curse.
Did it say that on the spec when you were recruiting for your own company? You said, "I want 0 years of experience."
No, it didn't. But our first, no joke, this is the truth. I want to say our first 16, 17, or 18 hires at VaynerMedia were not agency people.
Right.
And, that was...
But they were living on Instagram their entire lives.
100%. It was native to them. And we were looking for that different type of thinking. And honestly, you couldn't hire for social media experience anyway. Because nobody at the advertising agencies had it.
If they said they had
it, right? That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Anybody who said, I'm like, not.
But if you were under 15
true.
years old, you were a superstar.
So, I think that's both a blessing and a curse. And, we probably waited too long to make some really, simple. We had one client talk to us, no joke, 2 years in. You guys are amazing. You're the future. I love working with you. Can you hire somebody that understands how to build a deck? Because we just didn't have the basics,
well,
right?
you got Unilever as a client.
Unilever,
you had Anheuser-Busch as a client.
Yep,
These guys are expecting my old firm. They're expecting Discipline, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Booz, all these agencies.
And we didn't have it.
Yeah, we were polished up, right? You go in there. Packaging was everything.
We didn't have the polish, but we knew where the world was going. And so same thing with the sports agency. I started a sports agency. I had no sports agency experience. I'm just a big fan. I was an entrepreneur and investor. But what we've been able to do, and the reason why I think we've been able to add so many clients in such a short period of time is one, as CEO, one of my primary responsibilities is to build a great team. Sure. So, hiring the right people. I'm not the only certified agent on our staff. We have great agents, Brian McLaughlin, Brandon Parker, Tommy Sims, Andrew Brandt. Between the five of us, we cover so many aspects of what a player could want and could need. So that was probably first and foremost. And then two, like I said, fresh perspective. I think representing athletes as an industry is completely broken right now. I don't think that both sides are on the same page. I think the agents don't take care of the athletes as well as they should. I don't think the athletes treat the agents the way they should. I don't think it's a true partnership. So coming in, thinking big picture and not short term, having a different background in terms of marketing and investing. Absolutely. Being an investor, you mentioned Uber earlier. I invested in Uber almost 9 years ago. And when those guys hear that story, that resonates with them. Because a lot of these guys are trying to figure out, how do I take $40 million from playing football and turn that into $400 million? Yeah.
And other guys are trying to figure out how they retire and still have any part of the $40 million remaining.
That's exactly right.
That's problem.
Yes, it is.
All right, so let me change subjects just for a minute here. So the audience knows that I built, and we had a guest on our show, Jan Horsfall. We built a company called Maxletics. Actually, Jan built it with his partners, and he was kind enough to allow me to get involved. Jan was an old partner of mine in another business, and a lot of that is a data mining business, right, where we're using data as a competitive advantage underneath influencers. And our influencers are roughly 1,400 athletes, 22 governing bodies, 600 ex-Olympians, many of whom are gold, silver, and bronze medalists, right? So the way we're packaging and selling that whole philosophy is basically, if you get 10 athletes as a 10-athlete bundle, that's the average 45,000 followers, that's 450,000 followers, and they are going out and they're pretty much supporting the sponsors, making appearances, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. So kind of it's an everybody wins. Yep. The constituent wins. The consumer wins because they get excited about A, the product, and B, the influencer, which is the athlete. The brand wins, right? And, ultimately the athlete wins because there's incremental economics, especially for an Olympic athlete who just wants to go back and train, right? Yeah. They just want two sponsors to allow them to go train for the next 4 years and hopefully compete in the Olympics. So tell us a little bit about, your experience in that regard in terms of how people are thinking through agency selection. Look at Jay-Z and Rock Nation, right? Sure. All of a sudden, he just, what you said, he's reinvented the agency world, right? And he's now a factor in everybody's contract. Yeah. So there's Jay-Z. Are you proud of me for putting you guys on the same level?
I appreciate the association.
Right. No problem. And so tell us a little bit more about that, and tell us who the major players are as agents, and what is your fundamental point of difference? Go deeper for me, please.
Sure. So, first and foremost, I respect my competition, so I won't go too deep into, pros or cons on their side. But there's, and then also I'm going to speak to this specifically in the world of football because Vayner Sports only does football.
Less in terms of names and more in terms of approach.
So CAA is a big competitor. They lead the market. They're the biggest agency. They rep the most and the biggest. So they're one. You mentioned Rock Nation. And so I'll keep, and then the third I'll say, is just the more boutique. So I think CAA, Big Bad Wolf, Rock Nation, maybe smaller than that, but big influence, like you mentioned. And then the more boutique agency, which is there's a lot of. And what I would say that makes us a little bit different is that I actually think we're almost able to take each piece of what makes a boutique agency so great, right? The high touch personal attention. What makes Rock Nation so great in the minds of some in terms of the influence and the network, and then what makes CAA so great in the minds of some in terms of scale and resources because of, with Vayner Sports, the same founders of Vayner Sports, my brother and myself, are also the same founders of Vayner Media, right? And so we have this, small, high touch boutique feel. We have somebody like my brother that has unbelievable network and unbelievable access to brand deals or to the world of music or the world of Hollywood. And then, when needed, we have all these unbelievable resources of an 800-person independent, unbelievable advertising agency to help these guys build their brands and get endorsement deals. So it's an interesting landscape. You got the big, you got the middle, you got the small. We're trying to really take the best of every single world and bring it into one.
All right. That sounds like a lot of synergy to me. So I think that's great. Let's kind of bring it back to CBD a little bit. So, it gets interesting. I did a show about the World Athletic Doping Association and what their thought process was, their net message to the universe, which is mostly amateur sports and professional sports. And they suggest that they take their lead, right? Some do, some don't, of course, right? Mm-hmm. Their message was you ought to be substantially increasing nanograms of testing so that basically players only test positive for same-day use, right? Now, in baseball and which is more of a PED concern, right? And in, let's say, in hockey, quite frankly, hockey doesn't even pay attention to it. If any kind of a THC or CBD or any kind of cannabis-related activity shows up in a blood test, it's not even a factor, and it's not a factor because they consider it not enhancing,
right?
The athlete, right? Yeah. It's not a performance-enhancing drug, right? That's what they care most about,
right?
All right, so let's talk a little bit about that. Football, on the other hand, right, has taken a hard line, right?
Yeah.
And they've taken a very aggressive stance on nanograms of testing. Players are still getting caught. Yet everybody knows that the players are aggressive users. So how does that happen?
I think the current policy in place is in place more so for perception. It's more that the owners are concerned about how society views the players. The NFL and NFL players have had over the last 10, 15, 20 years an image issue, right? And the fact of the matter is, even when it comes to that image issue, it's unfair, right? So one example is domestic violence. When Ray Rice had his episode, and there's been numerous episodes of domestic violence, it portrayed all NFL players in a bad light, even though statistically the average American is more likely to commit domestic violence than the average football player.
Yeah, but the average American isn't going to be seen in an elevator.
That's exactly right.
Television.
That's exactly right. So image issues, right? And the NFL and every sport, by the way, the NBA is going through it right now with China. We don't have to go too deep into that, but that's an entire
certainly
thing
current,
going on.
But let's not go there.
Yeah, and so I truly believe that the primary rationale behind the current strict rules against CBD and cannabis is a societal image issue. And so I don't think the owners actually care. And if they do, I think they're out of touch anyway.
Right. I mean, people in the industry, the cannabis industry, obviously know that if you're over 65, as an example, you've probably grown up where cannabis was a jail sentence, right?
That's exactly right.
And so most of these owners, have certainly gray hair, if not older. Even Snyder, one of the youngest owners in the league, is heaven forbid, he's now old. Can't seem to win. Can't seem to hold on to a coach. But anyway, let's move on from there.
No comment.
So exactly right. So it's still a Schedule I drug at the federal level. Yeah. These guys are dealing with federal issues all the time. They've got substantial capital in federally insured banks, et cetera. It puts pressure on them.
That's right.
And it forces the team to understand what's the difference between CBD and THC, and it's all incremental testing. They don't want to deal with it, right?
Correct.
So I certainly understand it. I don't know if I respect it or not, but I certainly understand it. I'm sorry?
I don't respect it.
Okay, well, I kind of move in that direction as well, because if clinically, and we've had scientists from Israel here, Dr. Hinani Koltai, and a whole host of other superstars in the science space, and I've got 100,000 pages of clinical data at my house that proves that it's viable, right? It's kind of disappointing that, obviously the NFL kind of turns their what's the phrase? Turns their back on
nose
it.
or back. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's something about it.
One of the two. One body part
If it's
or
a
another.
back, they could take CBD and they can deal with the inflammation. All right, so Goodell, $40 million man, gets paid $40 million every year by the owners. He's owned by the owners. Clearly, I mean, he works for the owners. So I don't want to suggest that the word "own" is wrong, but he's employed by them. He takes a very hard line. Look what happened to Guerrero on Foxborough. Right?
Yeah.
Guerrero was talking about the power of plants. Many of the Patriots were excited about it. Word came down, from what I understand, and the pressure was put on a number of the management. And he was asked off the property under the general heading of we don't want individual trainers with individual players dealing with kind of training regimen for the entire team, because a lot of the team was responding. Right? What's your understanding of that?
I don't know too much about the situation. I can't speak to any of the specifics. Obviously, I'm aware of that news story and was aware of it when it hit the news cycle. The one thing I'll say about Goodell in particular, he's somebody that takes a beating, I think, amongst people in my profession and the media and the fans in general. One thing I'll say about Goodell, and I'm not the biggest fan of how he's handled some things. I have a lot of empathy for the job that he has. He has 32 bosses, and they're all very, very powerful men and women. And it's just he's kind of stuck in between a rock and a hard place. And I feel like he's the type of guy that has the job that no matter what he does, he'll be criticized. So just throwing that out there. It's something I've always thought about. And then, speaking to the whole Guerrero situation, I don't know much more than whatever showed up in the news there.
Right. Well, I'd say that Goodell has 40 million reasons every year to put up with that challenge.
I'm not saying he's underpaid.
No,
he's got a
but
tough
I
job.
understand. I mean, because look at what just happened to the commissioner of basketball with the China thing.
Great point.
And
so far,
today
with Adam Silver, they played the game in China, and it seems like a good win for Adam. Every commissioner has a super, super tough job.
No, they certainly do. They certainly do. All right, so we've projected on this show what each league is going to do, and our judgment says that until the Schedule 1 gets lifted, the NFL really isn't going to change much. What's your perspective on
I would
that?
tend to agree. The only other thing that runs through my mind, I would agree with that as a counterpoint, potentially. There's an upcoming collective bargaining agreement that needs to be negotiated. The work stoppage is potentially happening in 2021.
Fascinating.
I personally have some concern that the owners will utilize the CBD and cannabis topic as a concession point and give that to the players in exchange for still, killing them on the revenue share side of things. So that's a concern of mine. It really depends on how much the owners are withholding to the Schedule 1 aspect. But if they end up allowing CBD, even though it's still Schedule 1, then you'll know that the player side just got killed on the financial side.
Right. Well, let me just remind everybody, guys, that cannabis, the marijuana, the THC side, the psychoactive side of Schedule 1, the non-psychoactive CBD side, as of December of last year, was left okay. But I think to me, it's kind of a battle of health or money, right? On the one hand, if they get offered that, they're going to feel better, and the inflammation and recovery, et cetera, is going to be better.
Yeah.
And perhaps some long-term CTE viability in terms of what this may represent.
Yeah.
The downside is obviously they're going to negotiate with that as a weapon, and that's your point, isn't it? All right, very good.
Yeah.
All right, so this has been great. I just got a little bit of a hook from my friend Flipsy here. The guy's very delicate with how he handles things. He just puts it in my ear. That's how he does it. So let me just ask, if I may, give me a sense for you've got kind of an open mic here. How would you like to kind of leave the audience? Say whatever moves you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
any kind of
it.
a statement you'd like to make, please.
Well, first off, Jeffrey, thank you for having me. I think shows like this are important. I think that when it comes to CBD, and you just made a really important point between THC and CBD, it gets bundled into it, right? And that's just, I think, how society really pushed the narrative in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, et cetera. So I appreciate you having me on the show, and I appreciate you having the show. Other than that, I think when I think about CBD, it's just something that has always been fascinating to me. And, until I had my own personal experience utilizing for my Crohn's, having talked to my football players about how they think it can help with the inflammation in their brain, it's just something I've become really, really passionate about in these last 10 years or so. And I'm just excited to have a chance to talk about it today. So thank you.
All right, great. Well, we want to thank you very much for joining the show today. And perhaps you'll come back a little bit later on, and you can tell us how these players are progressing through their career.
That. I appreciate that. Thank you, Jeffrey.
All right, very good. All right, thanks very much. When we come back, the last segment of the show, responding to your messages, is up next.
It's one of the hottest healthcare issues in our country today. Cannabis and CBD. What is it? What are the medicinal facts? Where does the U.S. stand versus our allies and competitors around the world? Tune in to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill this Sunday at 8 a.m. on WOR and find out.
So people get confused sometimes about cannabis versus CBD, right? CBD is made from hemp, can be made from the marijuana plant as well, but the majority of it is made from hemp. It's the CBD component that has everybody very excited about the health implication, and that in concert with combinations of THC is really where the real solutions are.
Jeffrey Hill will explore the issue of cannabis and CBD as it has never been explored before. NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. Tune in and find out this Sunday at 8 a.m. on 710 WOR or download the podcast and listen anytime at iHeartRadio.com.
Welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill right here on 710 WOR Radio every Sunday at 8 a.m. Also available on iHeartRadio and iTunes. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at NYCBD Official. Don't forget I write a blog. Each post can be read in under 3 minutes. And like this show, the blog covers critical issues in the space. I'm up to about 65 blog posts, so catch up. I used to say before it's too late. Maybe it is too late. But anyway, my blog is medium.com/@JeffreyHill2. That's medium.com/@JeffreyHill2. Let me encourage you to not go back to the early ones. Just read the most recent ones because those obviously are a little bit more current. Now on to the fourth segment, responding to your messages. These are the best messages handpicked by Flips and I. Since we only have time for one this week, this one is the best. It comes from Judy from New York. She says, my son has PTSD challenges having recently come back from Afghanistan. His doctors at the VA has said to him they know cannabis can help, yet they can't support or pay for his treatment since cannabis is a Schedule I drug federally and the VA is a federally funded initiative. We keep talking about that, don't we? What did the passage of the States' Rights Act mean to me, she asks, in helping get my son the much-needed medicine without bankrupting us? Well, Judy, I'm sorry to say we are likely 2 to 3 years away from the VA helping cover your son's cannabis medicine. The States' Rights Act essentially lets states manage the cannabis category in each state without the concern that the federal government, which controls the DEA and the FBI, will reach into the state and exert their authority. But that is not going to help your son because the VA is controlled, as we've said so many times, by the federal government. And until the Schedule I gets lifted, her son is going to have to pay for it out of pocket. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed our show today and our guest, AJ Vaynerchuk.
I'm going to go on record in saying this is the best one. Out of every interview that we've done, I think this is the best one.
Okay.
Just saying.
I'm pleased to hear that, Flips. By the way,
just
Flips does countless shows, many more than I do, so he's got a good perspective. That's great. All right, so AJ Vaynerchuk is of Vayner Sports. So we'll be back next week for another 60 minutes of the critical issues facing cannabis and CBD. What issues, Flipsy? The medical issues, the political implications, and the financial implications. Remember, knowledge is built brick by brick. Today you got my 22nd brick. Until next week, this is NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill.